All right, welcome to the tutorial videos on how to program in object-oriented environment in C#. In this particular video tutorial, we're going to look at the object-oriented programming basics. So we're going to look at things like how to create a class, how to define an object, instantiation, and methods and attributes. So what we're going to do is we're going to start a new C# project. And as you're watching the videos, feel free to pause at any particular time and catch up what I'm doing. I'd like you to code this as you're watching this video. So just pause the video if you need to catch up. All right, the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to define and start a new project. So go to File, New Project, and we're going to use a console app. I'm going to call this one OOP1 classes and objects. All right, once you've done that, just click OK. And you'll be presented with a blank program. And now that we're actually here, it's probably worth noting to you that we already are using a class at the moment. This program class, has already been created for us for our program to work. And in fact, we've already got a method set up for us, it's the main method. And you've been using this ever since you've learned to program in C#. Well, hopefully, now that you've learned a bit about classes and objects, this kind of information will now make a bit more sense. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put some developer comments to give us some guidance on what we're going to do. So I'd like you to copy along these developer comments. I'm just going to copy this here and we'll just finish off. Just move that across. Alrighty, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new lesson for about object-oriented basics. So just get that information down and we can move on. All right, so the first thing that I've said is we're going to create a new class. Now, if we go back to the PowerPoint, a class was basically defined as it's like a blueprint or a template, if you like, for the object itself. So the class basically defines what attributes and methods the object that's going to be created will have. So let's go ahead and define a new class in C#. And to do that, all you need to type in is class. We're going to make a human class here. And end it and sandwich it between your curly braces. All right, we've just created our new class. Inside this class, we're going to have attributes and we're going to have methods. All right. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create the human attributes. So this, going off our slide, was name, height, weight, age, and gender. All right, so the way we declare these 5 attributes for our human class is very similar to how we declare variables. So in this case, all we're going to do is we're going to figure out what data type is name. Well, that's easy, that's a string. And we'll just type in string, name, and then what we'll do is we will add these funny little constructors here. Call them the getter and setter methods, and just directly after that. Now, I'll explain these a bit later or in another tutorial what they do, but just for the moment, think of it like you're declaring a new variable. All right, so the next one we need is a double, and that will be for, I think I said height. age, that will be an integer. And gender will be a string. Alrighty, so we've just defined our attributes now. And these attributes, by the way, I'm getting them straight from this particular PowerPoint that we've gone over previously. Now, what we can do is we can then, once we've created those attributes, we can then create our object. So from this blueprint, this class that we've created, we can now create our new human object. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a new human from the human class. So what we're going to do is inside our main program, we're going to what we call create a new instance of the class. We're going to create a new object. And if you remember back from the PowerPoint, this process of creating a new object is called instantiation. Okay, so what happens in instantiation is as the object's being created, a spot in memory is allocated for this object, and this is where this object will live for the life of itself. And to create a new human, we type in the following code. So we reference the class where it's coming from, so it's a new human coming from the human class. Then we give it a variable name, so I'm going to call it human1 equals a new human. All right, so we're referencing the class, we give it a name, equals, we're creating a new human. Okay, at this point, after this line of code, the object now sits in memory and it's been born. And so then what we can do is once we've instantiated it, we can then now start assigning attributes. So let's just say this new human has been just born. And for this exercise sake, we're going to use my son, Tobias, all his information because he's just been born, right? So what we're now going to do is we're going to declare and display attributes of our new human. So what I'm going to do is, the way you do this is you type in the human that you've just created. So it's not human, it's actually the variable name that we've created. So this refers to this object. It's actually called human1. And then you use the dot there. And then if you were doing this right, what you would see is a list of the attributes like name, height, weight, age, etc. But none of that appears when we use Microsoft IntelliSense in Visual Studio. So why is that? Well, if you go back to our lesson about local versus global variables, you might recall that inside a code block, if you declare a variable inside a code block, it's only available within that code block. So I can access the name variable or a name attribute inside these curly braces. But as soon as I go outside of those curly braces in my program class, I won't be able to see them because they are private. So for example, if I start typing in, that's what's happening there. So the way around this is to make these variables public. And that way, if you make a variable public, then all classes can then see these attributes. All you have to do is just put public before them, and they've moved from private to public. So now, if we reference human1, you'll see that the attributes are now there. So we can now start filling out this information for Tobias. All right, so this new object created, we're going to fill it out, flesh it out with actual information. All right, so that's his name. That's his birth height, 54 centimeters. Equal to 4.03. And that is equal to, when he was born, so he's just been born, so he's 0 years old. And human1 gender is a male. All right. So you can see here now that we've allowed our attributes to be public, we can now see them in our other classes. So that's basically initializing this new object's attributes. But we probably want to be able to display these attributes and see what they are on the screen. Because if we just run the program, I'm just going to do a console.readline because my version of Visual Studio requires me to do this, otherwise the program will just exit. If I just run this now, this program is essentially useless because all it's doing is just saving a few information about Tobias and I can't see anything, right? So I'll need to do a console.writeline. But before we do this, we're just going to put these comments in just so that you can reference this back in the future. Okay. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to want to display human1's attributes to the screen. And so this is fairly straightforward. This is just a console.writeline, and then actually just referencing their attributes. In fact, what we would normally do is format this a bit. So we might put name, and then a space, exclamation mark, and a plus symbol, and then we would chain on each of the variables. For example, we do height, plus human1 dot height, etc. Now we could do this and it would work, but it's a bit cumbersome and it's not as elegant as another way we could do this. And I'm going to show you how to use string interpolation. And string interpolation is actually, it sounds a fancy name, but it's very easy to use once you know how to use it. So what we'll do is we'll do this. And I'll explain it at the end. Actually, that will be height first. And I'll just make this a bit easier for you to see as well. So we'll just create a new line, and you can totally do this in C#, that's fine. This will just be essentially one massive line of code. Finish it off with a semicolon. Alrighty. So while you're getting that down, it's important to explain how this all works. So instead of chaining them on with addition or plus symbols, what you simply do is you just start your quotation marks and you put your entire sort of string in quotation marks. And where you want the variables to kind of fit, you just use these curly braces, and then a number. And so after name space, I want the human1.name to appear. And so I've just put a 0 there because it's the first thing that's going to appear. And this directly relates to, after the quotation marks, it starts. So it's going to pull whatever I've assigned here, the variable that I've assigned here, and it's going to pull it straight into there instead. So it's going to remove the 0. And the same for height. It's going to remove the 1 and just put the actual height there. So let me demonstrate this. So you can see here that that's pulled all the right information through. So this is just another way to out display strings, and I strongly encourage you to remember this method because it's fairly simple to use once you know how to use it. Alrighty, so that's declaring and displaying the attributes. We talked about private versus public attributes as well, and string installation. All right, so now our object has got attributes, but it doesn't have any methods yet. So perhaps it might be good to create a method. And so what we'll do here is we'll create a method that just allows us to increase the age of our human. And this is a common process that happens for humans, is that they age every year, right? They age from 3, then age changes from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, etc. So this would be a common sort of process that happens, if you like, for a human object. So to create a method, it's very, very similar to creating a subprogram in C#. And so what we can do is start with the keyword void, and we'll give it a name, so we'll increase age. We'll put our parentheses there, and we put our curly braces. And just to remember that void means it's actually not returning anything. It's just going to do some processing. And if you recall back to our PowerPoint, you'll remember that there's interaction between methods and attributes. And in this example, the eat method directly affected the weight attribute, right? Because if you eat, you're probably going to put some kilograms on. The same goes with this private method here. This will increase age. So what we'll do is simply just put age plus plus. All right, and every time this method runs, age increases by 1. And that's all wrapped and contained inside this human class, which will then be inherited by the object itself. So if we want to use this in our program, it's very similar to how we would use the attributes. We would simply say human1 dot, and if this was public, it would appear here to actually be used. But as you've noticed, it's a private method, right? By default, it's a private method. So we will need to make it a public method so that any class can use it. And so now let's try this again for our newly created object. We should be able to see that this method now exists. And just something else for you to store in the memory bank. The spanner indicates that that's an attribute, and a cube indicates it's a method that can be used by the object. So there's just a good thing to remember in the memory bank. All right, so the way we use it is we use it like a normal subprogram. We have to put our parentheses there. And when we run this, we're going to increase the age. So I'm going to just run this, and we're going to have Tobias's information there, but we've actually run our method too, so age should be 1, but we haven't output that yet. So what we could do is directly after running that method, we could just output it again and see if age has changed. So let's try that. And you can see here that age has now changed by 1. So that's us using a method inside our main program. Now this is starting to become a bit sloppy, this code, because we're copying and pasting and duplicating code. We always want to try and avoid duplication of code. So you might be asking, well, how can we get around this? Well, this seems like a process that the object might use over and over again, i.e. to display its own attributes. So perhaps it actually might be useful to create a new method inside the object, and that we can just call that method whenever we need it. And it's self-contained inside that object. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm just going to cut this. I'm going to go ahead and create a new method called public void display attributes. All right, and I can just simply copy and paste my code, but there will be a problem here. Now, if you remember, up here, we are referencing a specific object, right, which is human1, which has just been created. But in a class, it's the blueprint, if you like, for all objects. So we don't want to reference a single type, a single object. We want to be able to be rolled out for all objects that are created from this point forward. So all we need to do is just reference the attribute itself, right? Which means less typing too, because the attribute is directly accessible inside this class. Another way that people do it, which is now kind of deprecated, we don't really use this anymore, is we say this.name and this.height, which refers to itself when it's been created. But you don't actually need this, so we'll just remove that. All right, so now we've got attributes and we've got 2 methods as well. And so what we can do is just remove our console.writeline here and simply just reference the display attributes method here now. And then we can do that there. So already, if you didn't have the class expanded and you're just focusing on your main method or your main program, you can see here that the amount of code that's cluttering up the screen is a lot less than what was there before. Now, I want to highlight this idea by going back to the PowerPoint and remembering that we actually have 2 objects that we want to create. We've got human1, which we've created, but I want to show you the power of objects and the amount of time it saves by using objects. So let's say we wanted to generate another human. Another human's been born. Well, that's actually fairly easy to do, because all we do is we'll create a new human. Create an instance of a second human. And if you remember back up here, it's simply the class name, human, then a variable name, and it has to be different to human1's. Let's call it human2, for example. It's the second human. Equals, it's a new human. And then we're going to create attributes for our new human, for our second human. And this will just be simply referencing the human name and then going straight onto their name. And I'll use my daughter for this one. And we'll go back to when she was born. She was 47 centimeters. She was a lot smaller. She was just born, depending, she's just been born. And her gender, she's a female. All right. And because we've got a method that displays these, we've got a method that displays this information, we can just simply, after this, just call that method. Which will just be human2 dot display attributes. Right, and so if we ran this, we'll have Tobias's information, but then we've now referenced Phoebe's information by using that display attributes method. And we can do the same thing. We can increase Phoebe's age by calling that method that we've created. And then we can display the attributes again. So just run that again. And then you can see Phoebe's age has now increased by 1. Now, that's basically it for this lesson. We've gone through a lot, but there is one more thing I just kind of want to show you. And I want to make this increase age a bit more authentic for Phoebe, because we don't just increase age willy-nilly. We increase age when it's our birthday. So what I'm going to do is add a new attribute, and I'm going to call it date of birth. All right. And then when she's been instantiated, and I'm going to set some attributes here. So I'm going to set the date of birth to be, let's just call it today's date so we can get this to work. All right, let's say she was born in 2019 and we want it to tick over so she's now 1 year old because it's the 13th of April. I can wrap a condition around this, and I can say, well, if today's date, which is the date time class, if today's date is equal to Phoebe's, human2's date of birth, then I'll wrap that around there, then increase the age. Now, you can see here that we're trying to compare the two. So human2, DOB, is a string, and this one over here follows it's the date time data type, if you like. So we can't actually compare them. We have to compare apples with apples or like with like. So we need to get them either to both be dates or both be strings. Now it's probably easier to convert the date to the string because that just uses the dot to string method. All right, and once we do that, we'll be able to at least compile this and test this out. So I'm just going to remove this information. Actually, one way to do this is just to highlight all of that and just click this button here, and that will comment out all of those lines of code. And I want to see now if Phoebe has aged from 0 to 1. Let's see if this condition's been run. And you can see here that it's not working. You can see here that she is still 0 years old after we've run supposedly run the increase age method. So what's actually happening here is it hasn't met this condition. And the reason why is if I was to troubleshoot this, what I would do is I'd simply console.writeLine and I would actually see what this actually outputs. And you can see here in between the two that it outputs, yes, today's date, but what it doesn't output, what it outputs in addition is the time as well, or the start of the day, 12 a.m. So if I was comparing this literal string to 13/04/2020, they're not the same. They're not identical. So what we need is just the date component of that. And what I did was I went to, let's close some of these. I went to the C# to string method, and I just looked this up. go through all of this. There were some parameters that I found. Hang on, let me just. Let's have a look and see any of these articles. Anyway, I found I think it's the format provider. And there's a number of different ways to kind of chop up this particular date and time. Oh, sorry, it wasn't the two-stringed method. It was this one, the date, time, today method. It was this one, sorry. Here we go. So if you have a look here, this particular example showed us the way we use this is we can convert this date and time to string, right? And there are some different arguments inside these parameters. And if you do it like this, it will only output the date, all right? If you do it with a capital D, it will output it in literal words like this. And then if you output it with a G, then it will output it with the time as well. So what we're actually looking for is this one, and this correlates to this, all right? So we need to put these quotation marks inside it. All right, and now what we should expect is that will equal, that condition will be true, and increase age will actually run. And you can see here that it actually does run now. Okay, I'll just remove this because that's confusing. In fact, I'll just prove to you, I'll put the D inside of that and I'll show you what that formats to. You can see here that's now formatted that correctly. And so that's just a bit more authentic. So basically what we're saying is if today's date is equal to their date of birth, then we're going to increase age by 1. I just wanted to just a little side there. So that concludes this lesson, but let me just recap what we've done. So firstly, we created a new human class down here. And this class contained attributes and it contained methods. We first started with attributes, and it's declaring an attribute is very much like declaring a variable with a few differences. Firstly, we have to put these getter and setter methods there, and we can explain that in another tutorial. And the second thing is that we need to understand that if we want it to be available via different classes, we would make it a public attribute. Otherwise, if you wanted it only to be used within the object itself, or you only want the object to access it, then you can make it a private string, a private attribute. And then we instantiated our new object, or created an instance of our new object, and created a new human. And then we filled out those attributes inside our main program. Then what we did is we created a method called increase age. And essentially what that does, that just increases the attribute by 1. It increases it by 1 when it's run. And so we ran that, and we saw that aged increased. And we also created a second method that allowed us to display the attributes whenever it's run, which was quite handy because we saved essentially duplication of code, and it's a much more elegant solution now. And then finally, we created a second human just to show you that from this one blueprint, we can create multiple objects, or multiple humans in this case. And then finally, we just played around with making the increase age method a bit more authentic. So stick around, make sure you get all of this code down, and then we'll move on to the next exercise that's required for you.